Wow. Good evening. You got quiet right away. Thank you. I'm Jim Valentini. I'm the Dean of Columbia College, for those of you who don't know. I am very happy to be here tonight to introduce our guest and our interviewer. I'm actually starstruck tonight, doubly so. The title of this event is House of Cards Comes to Columbia. I hope not all aspects of House of Cards actually come to Columbia. I'm afraid to go into the subway these days with certain characters. My wife and I started watching House of Cards, binge watching it at the winter break this year, and I would say it was one of the most significant viewing experiences I've ever had. And it certainly is a great expression of what Nietzsche called the will to power in its worst forms. Anyway, our guest tonight is Beau Willimon, who's Columbia College class of 2009 and School of the Arts class of 2003, screenwriter, playwright, producer, creator and executive producer of House of Cards, which in the last 2 years has received 22 Emmy nominations and 4 Golden Globe nominations. Beau was involved in many things at Columbia. One of them, and subsequent to his time here, one of them was political campaigns, including the senatorial campaign of Chuck Schumer in 1998, Bill Bradley's presidential campaign in 2000, Hillary Clinton's Senate campaign in 2000, and Dean's presidential campaign in 2004. This is the basis for one of his previous works, a play called Farragut North, which is about a press secretary for a presidential candidate at the Iowa caucus, for those of you who haven't seen it. It became, through his screenplay adaptation, a movie called The Ides of March, which received Academy Award and Golden Globe nominations for Best Adapted Screenplay. At Columbia, Beau wrote and illustrated for Spectator, and now that Spectator is archived, you can actually find his illustrations, some of which I have sought out. There is nothing one can do today that isn't going to be... They're actually quite good. He also rode on our crew team for a while, which is one of the reasons in House of Cards you will find the always friendly Frank Underwood on an erg. He won an award at Columbia and cash as part of that award for a play he submitted for the Seymour Brick Memorial Playwriting Competition, and that was his first big success. I am not only starstruck, but I am pleased to recognize a kindred spirit in one small dimension. Beau was quoted as saying once, this is about food, "I mostly see food, as fuel. I wish I could have a little brick that I could consume in 30 seconds and that would be my meal for the day." In his free time, he watches reality television, as many of us do, including Flipping Out and Pawn Stars. He was, as some of you will have read, profiled in Columbia College Today in 2009, and if you haven't read that profile, I recommend that you do so. I'm also starstruck tonight to introduce the person who will be interviewing Beau, Professor Annette Insdorf, who was also profiled in Columbia College Today, actually last year in 2014. Professor Insdorf is in the graduate film program of the School of the Arts and was until very recently, and for a very long time, the director of the undergraduate film studies program. I have known her as long as I've been at Columbia, and this year I received an email from Annette. I've received many emails in which she was recommending to me that film studies be implemented as part of the core curriculum. Annette has a different relationship to food than Beau and I do because she was born in Paris. At least I suspect she has a different relationship. She was trained as an opera singer. She received her PhD in English, not film studies, but English at Yale. She describes her approach to film as, "My approach is first and foremost sympathetic," and I'm sure she will be a sympathetic interviewer, but a clever one tonight as well. And she has much experience interviewing. She has interviewed more than 100 celebrities for a program called Reel Pieces, that's R-E-E-L, Pieces, at the 92nd Street Y. I am very pleased to welcome Beau Willimon and Annette Insdorf to the stage.
Welcome back to Columbia, Beau.
Thank you. Well, we got the Nietzsche quote out of the way, so I was studying all day which Nietzsche quote I was going to use, but you stole my thunder. Actually, in my high school in my high school yearbook, you got to write like a little thing, and being a pretentious little shit, I quoted Nietzsche, and I think the quote was, "We love life not because we want to live, but because we want to love," which is the softer side of Nietzsche. So, anyway, shall we begin the begin?
Absolutely. Now, the question that I think some of us would want to know is why you chose Columbia College in the first place. You could have gone to Yale. There were other schools too. What was it about Columbia that drew you?
New York City. To me, one of the coolest things about Columbia is the fact that it's two campuses. It's the one that we're in right now, and it's the other school, which is one of the cultural epicenters of the world, a place for adventure and mischief, for experiencing the whole world in one place. I mean, 6 out of 10 New Yorkers were born in another country. I've lived in New York now for 20 plus years, and I still feel like every day I walk out of the front door, something might happen that I've never experienced before. And I just got that vibe at Columbia, that being a school that exists in this incredible, crazy cauldron that is New York City, it's fed by that city as much as it feeds the city back, and there's not really quite any place like it. So I did the whole college visiting thing, and I felt an energy here that was hard to describe, but was visceral and palpable, and I gravitated towards it.
I can certainly understand that.
Yeah.
I actually was at Yale doing my PhD, and I was telling Beau earlier that he made the right decision to come to Columbia.
New Haven it's got all the grittiness, but not the energy.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I think my most vivid memories of Yale is taking the train back and forth to Manhattan on weekends. But I got a great education. It's just that I think Columbia is a far more scintillating
Well, I
place.
actually said yes to Yale, and then I went and visited, and I had visited Columbia a few times, and I was there, and I remember I think it was Easter weekend, and it was it was like a dreary weekend, and what am I doing? Why am I not spending the next 4 years of my life in New York? And the experience I'd had here visiting were pretty fabulous. So I was flying back from this orientation thing, and I called my dad from a payphone back when those existed in Pittsburgh, because I had a layover. I remember it was the day of the Oklahoma City bombing. That was all over the TV. And I call up my dad and I say, I want to change my mind and tell Yale I'm not going there. I want to go to Columbia. And silence on the other end of the line. And he said, and then we'll discuss when you get home. And we discussed all right. It was a pretty major argument. But I was firm. And to his credit, my dad got behind the decision I wanted to make. And you'll find no bigger fan of Columbia University on the planet than my dad, who fell in love with this place the same way I did.
Great. Now, you graduated actually in 1999, right? I think you added another 10
Yeah.
years there, right? Graduated in 99 from the
Prince.
college, and then 2003. While you were here, I mean, you were just telling us before that you took all kinds of courses. In fact, more courses per term than most of us do. Well, that was later. That was in the School of the Arts.
No,
For the
I
moment,
took your course as an undergrad.
you took it as an undergrad.
Yeah,
Huh?
French. The one and only film course I ever took in my life was Annette Insdorf's French New Wave, which was a revelation. I mean, I had a lot of cinephile friends growing up, the sort of guys that knew the most obscure stuff coming out of West African cinema, and just mind-blowing stuff that I'd always felt kind of alien to. I just didn't know enough about film to understand how to watch these films. And I took and that's French New Wave course, and it taught me how to watch film in a way where you could totally enjoy that just pure gut experience of watching a great movie, but also how to think about it and talk about it with some of the greatest films ever made, the French New Wave. So, for the one course in film I ever took, it was a pretty damn good one.
Thank you. Now, what I was really getting at, but I appreciate the lovely digression, was whether you knew when you were at Columbia, whether undergrad or grad, that you would end up writing for film and television and theater.
I had no
was
idea.
that? No.
Well, theater, so I started out as a painter, actually. I could paint and draw before I could read and write. And I had 2 majors as an undergrad. One was history, and the other was visual arts. And in fact, the guy who taught me printmaking, intaglio, lithography, is sitting right over there, Thomas Vu. For those of you who've watched, have any of you watched season 3 yet? Okay, raise your hand if you've seen it. Oh, wow. That's a lot of people. Who hasn't watched season 3? There might be some spoilers. Tough shit, you showed up. But you guys, those of you who have seen it, I'm not ruining this for anyone, you know the surfboard in the 3rd episode? That's a real art object, as they say.
That too.
Here at Columbia, and it's a beautiful board. I am the proud owner of that board now, made by Thomas Vu, who is mentioned. So that Thomas makes those boards, and he teaches. He runs the Neiman Center. Anyway, I studied visual arts with great professors like Thomas, who really challenged me and pushed me at every turn to take a natural talent for drawing and actually do something meaningful with it. But my problem was that I was settling for impressing people. And look, as Thomas will tell you, or anyone who's in the visual arts, like being able to draw well is that's cheap. It's a dime a dozen. Throw a stone and you'll hit someone who can draw well, just like you'll hit someone who can play guitar well. But there's not many people who play guitar like Jimi Hendrix, and there's not many people, who can let the facility of their drawing go and do something like de Kooning, which is almost like destroying his own facility in order to find something deeper. And during my, I guess, between junior and senior year, I, at Thomas's encouragement, applied for this fellowship it was actually a Yale fellowship, funnily enough, to go do paintings in a barn for 6 weeks up in Connecticut, which I did. And it was so frustrating to me because I had no voice. I could paint all these pictures that most people were impressed by, but I knew they were completely empty. And I came back that summer and needed to shake things up. So I decided that I would try to do something that I knew I would fail at, and that was write a play. I loved the theater, but I never thought I would have a career in it. I'd never tried to write something seriously in my life, and I wrote the play that won this prize. It's the world's worst play. It's called The Goat Herd. That's a terrible name for a play, okay? The Goat Herd. It involved a goat herd, a motel owner, Muhammad Ali, and a manned mission to Mars. Sounds cool? It's not. It's not. But, and I think I'm the only person who submitted for that prize. I think this was back in the day of flyers, and at the Alfred Lerner Student Center that was still under construction, I tore down the one flyer that was up. So I think I was... my Underwoodian ways. I mean, that one act got me $1,500, dude. That was like a sizable prize. Anyway, but I wrote this play, and what was great was I realized 2 things. One is that I want to tell stories, which you can't do fully in a static image to the same degree that you can in the theater. You can tell a lot of story in a static image, but it's limited in terms of the amount of content of narrative that it can. I mean, even if you look at Bruegel, where there's like a whole novel's worth of story going on, it's still it's not in motion. You're not in the same room with it, and the experience of it is solitary. So I love the idea that I could tell a story in real space and real time in 3 dimensions. And I also realized that I loved failing, which I didn't realize before. I mean, I wrote a play that I knew was bad, and I didn't know how to write a better one. And I thought that challenge, the discipline required to learn something new, that the work ethic required for that. I mean, it felt like learning to draw blindfolded with my left hand. I was totally lost, and that was exciting to me. If I wanted to impress myself, if I wanted to make something even halfway decent, I was really going to have to work at it. And so slowly but surely I started kind of veering towards that. And, by hook or by crook, in a lot of sort of twists and turns involving a fellowship to Estonia after I graduated, which I got from this man, Jenna created, and I'll tell you more about that later. Living in Vietnam for a few months, kind of disappearing off the grid in the East Village, and kind of finagling my way into grad school. During all that time, I realized that theater is what I wanted to do, and I came back to Columbia to study it, but I had no notion that I would ever end up in film or TV. I mean, my aims were much lower. I had no plan. I didn't know where to begin. I didn't know anybody. And I just thought, well, this is one way to live a life, and I don't know any other way to do it. So I'll just dive in and see what happens. And it's been quite an adventure, I must say. Yeah.
Good adventure.
Yeah.
I'm going to guess, though, that one of the things that you studied at Columbia, probably as an undergrad, is Shakespeare.
Yes.
And I'm going to mention that only because even if I have not seen as many episodes of House of Cards, embarrassedly, as most of the people here, I've seen enough to know that there are wonderful Shakespearean rumbles, whether it's literal in the dialogue or in the structuring of it. And I know that some of it comes from the House of Cards British thing that we'll talk about later. But could you tell us a little about whether studying Shakespeare, or for that matter, the Iliad, the Odyssey, whatever, the core curriculum for which Columbia College is so well known?
I took 6 years of Latin before I even got here. I read, well, I didn't read the Iliad in Greek. I didn't know Greek. I knew Latin. Catullus and Ovid and Horace. But I tried to learn ancient Greek here in one of those accelerated graduate programs, but as an undergrad, like the summer between junior and senior year, that same weird summer, I was trying to learn German and ancient Greek in those 6-week accelerated programs where you're supposed to be able to like have basic reading knowledge after 6 weeks. Now, if you're going to take any of those, you can't do it with ancient Greek and German. Okay, those languages are just way too hard. And I'm bad at languages to begin with. And I was failing miserably at those 2 courses. And my buddy Jay, who's also an ST fellow, he said, hey, this guy's running for Senate from Brooklyn, a guy named Chuck Schumer. You should come work on this campaign. And I'm like, that's a great excuse to drop these 2 classes. Best decision I ever made, because it led to the whole, but back to Shakespeare. Yeah, in fact, I took a great year-long Shakespeare survey course with, and I feel horrible that maybe one of you can help me. I don't know if she's still here, but she was one of the editors of the Norton and, complete Shakespeare. Sorry? First name? I don't know. I don't think so. She had short, sort of light brownish hair and glasses. We sometimes had class, weirdly, in a church, because if the classroom was too small. I don't know. Anyway, it was great. We read a lot of Shakespeare. And look, I mean, I think if you're going to be a playwright, you have to know what came before you. I mean, one of the things that the head of the playwriting division at Columbia at the time, Eduardo Machado, made us do is read every single Greek play. Not just some of them, not just like a best of, but every single one. We had to read every Shakespeare play. You have to read every Chekhov and Ibsen play. You need to know what's already been done so that you can then break all those rules. And I think the same goes for if you're a painter. You need to look at the works of those who've come before you. If you're a dancer, you need to go see dance. But for Shakespeare, Shakespeare, when it comes to the theater, is the titan in the English language, and you got to know him like the back of your hand. So we don't often have long conversations where we're talking about Shakespeare in the writer's room, but I mostly populate the writer's room with playwrights. I know they all know their Shakespeare. It bubbles forth. Like, you want to learn this stuff so well that you don't have to think about it, that just it kind of subliminally makes its way into what you're doing. And sometimes we outright rip things off. I mean, writers are professional thieves. I mean, you don't borrow stuff, you steal it. Filmmakers are the same way.
Of course. But if you're going to steal from the best.
Yeah, well, no, the beginning of season 2, when you see them jogging towards the camera, well, I had long conversations with Fincher about that, and David Fincher and Carl Franklin, who was directing those 2 episodes. We had shot an opening scene that was bad. I had written this really bad scene that when we saw it edited together just didn't work. And I wanted to simplify, and I just wanted a scene about determination and forward movement and partnership. And I wanted to simplify to just seeing the 2 of them running. Now, you saw a shot where it's just a tableau of a park, and then kind of just emerging from the murky blackness are these 2 figures that get closer and closer, and it's about 1 minute and 10 seconds. Epic amount of screen time just for 2 people running. And then they get, and we hold the static image, and then they get into the foreground, and we sort of pull back as they, push in as they get close to us. They sort of look at each other, and they continue running out of frame. But that shot, originally, what I wanted to do was completely rip off the opening shot of Birth, where it's about a 3.5-minute sequence of incredibly shot before the days of being able to digitally stabilize and move cameras and all. This is a shot of a guy running through Central Park, I believe, in the middle of winter for 3.5 minutes. And I had wanted to do that shot exactly. I just said, let's just do Birth. Let's not even try to hide it. Let's just do Birth. But then we found we couldn't actually do it in terms of, because David is such a perfectionist in terms of focus and lighting, that for us to get what would have been a half mile of track in order to do it, and then have to paint out all the track digitally and all this stuff during a night exterior was impossible. And we were thinking of all different ways we could do it. And then Carl said, what if we just reverse it, and instead of following, have them come towards us? And that ended up being the shot, and it was beautiful. But it started from the intent of theft.
If Birth were better known, you could call it homage and get away with it.
Yeah, that's another word they use here. Yeah, I call it stealing. But Shakespeare, it's. There's so much that we're stealing all the time. And Direct Address, which we stole from the BBC version, which they stole from Shakespeare. There's obviously parallels between the Underwoods and the Mech. You know who they are, but I'm sitting on a stage.
The Scottish play.
Yeah, those 2 cats. Iago, Othello, Coriolanus, Henry IV, Part 1 and 2.
Richard III?
Richard III, of course, which Kevin did for a full year.
Exactly.
As part of the Bridge project before we began filming. But, there is one scene in particular which outright stole from Henry IV, Part 2, I believe. It's the greatest scene in all of Shakespeare, in my opinion. And also, Orson Welles thinks it's the greatest scene in all of Shakespeare, and he knew a thing or two. There's a scene where Prince Harry is going to be crowned king. And Harry has been hanging out with Sir John Falstaff and Pistol and all of those degenerates in the tavern. And a lot of those scenes are written in prose, in fact, not in iambic pentameter. Which was a huge sort of revolution in dramaturgy, or style, I should say, for Shakespeare. But because he was writing the peasants, the plebes, in prose. And in this scene, Harry has to tell Falstaff, I'm turning my back on you. As king, when I become king, I can no longer associate with your ilk. And the scene, because it's a Falstaff scene, has comedy to it, but it's also deeply tragic. It's about love and betrayal. It's about royalty and peasantry. It's about everything. I mean, it's just a fantastic scene. And so the scene where Freddie has lost the rib joint and his past is coming back to haunt him in the press, and Frank shows up at his apartment and has to say, I can no longer associate with you, was a very conscious ripping off of that scene. Because in some ways, Freddie is our Falstaff, and the stakes have become high enough for Frank as VP that he can't associate with this guy, especially with his checkered past, in the way that he used to. And what was his he has to turn his back on his own sanctuary and his friend. Whether people realize or not that we're trying to rip off that Shakespeare scene, I don't care. If they realize it, great. If they don't, fine. But for us, we shamelessly just, looked at that scene and said, how do you do it in House of Cards? And, I like it. I think it's a good scene. Yeah.
I appreciate your candid acknowledgement of ripping off, bordering on self-flagellation, but what I'm wondering is whether
It's
you
not,
should...
no, this is like ego. I'm a really good thief.
Okay, but the reason that I even phrased it this way
you
is...
should make sure that ring is still on your finger by the time...
I'll take my chances. But no, it's that Shakespeare himself was an acknowledged,
absolutely.
consummate ripper-off.
Well,
those
Hamlet,
plots and
yeah.
characters existed. So what you're doing is not necessarily, so steely compared to what Shakespeare was doing. It's art exists so much as a conversation. I know I'm softening it from your stealing and maybe too much so, but every great artist.
In your class, the French New Wave is a great example.
Okay.
They're looking at people like Ford and saying, how do we rip that and
That's
put it, and they put it in a totally different world with their voice in different context, so it doesn't feel like theft, but
they did say homage. The French New Wave.
'Cause they're French.
They were all about, they loved Hitchcock, for example, right? So they would quote, directly from Hitchcock.
Balzac?
Oh, yeah, well, Balzac. If we go into the literary, then it's
Yeah.
Truffaut, especially with Balzac. But, when it came to movies, they were claiming that they were paying homage to Hawks and Ford and Hitchcock and Sam Fuller and who knows who else. But it's partly because they wanted to call attention to the great American movies that had been kind of ignored after World War II, that weren't taken seriously by anyone but the French critics.
Yeah, I think there's a big difference between copying and mimicry,
Right.
which is derivative, and outright stealing, which is different, which is saying, I'm going to take what's yours and make it mine. But in making it mine and putting it in my house, on my shelf, you transform it. But if I'm just trying to copy what others are doing, then I'm not doing it with my own voice.
Okay. Now, to get back to your own voice, because obviously the first play, Farragut North, which was actually optioned for a movie even before it had its theatrical run in 2008 at the Atlantic Theater Company. I'm curious, you just mentioned working on Chuck Schumer's campaign. In the introduction, we heard that you worked on Clinton, Bill Bradley, et cetera, and Howard Dean, of course. Which was the most formative shaping towards the play, Farragut North?
The easy answer would be Dean, but I have to say, I didn't work on any of these campaigns with the mindset that I was doing research. The first campaign, Schumer, I was just happy not to be studying Greek and German. It was a pure lark. I thought it'd be an adventure, and it was. Dean, Bradley and Hillary, Jay, again, my friend who wrote me into the first campaign.
Jay Carney?
Jay Carson.
Carson.
Yeah. Jay Carney was press secretary for Obama.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
I
Jay
filmed
Carson.
in his office, actually, for a spoof that we did. It was fun. I stole some stuff, for real.
Why am I not surprised?
I'm not a kleptomaniac, but everything in the White House has like the presidential seal on it, from bubble gum to to M&Ms, to coffee cups. And there were a few of these objects that were like, you know, a coffee cup or something that he was just going to throw out anyway. I'm like, I'm taking that. That's cool. Anyway, Jay Carson. So you know, I believed in those candidates. I wanted them to win. And I honestly was just trying to make the world a better place in my own infinitesimal way. Dean was after grad school. I had some free time on my hand, translation unemployed. And Jay said, why don't you come out to Iowa? And I did. And I'm very low on the totem pole jobs on all of these campaigns. He's the one I based Farragut and Ides of March on. So it's not so much, you know, Dean, I experienced Iowa, and of course the play takes place in Iowa. But it's mostly my friendship with Jay that was the most formative thing in writing that play than it was any one campaign. And Jay gave me access to the inner sanctum, to the higher echelons that I wouldn't have had otherwise. And he's a remarkable, you know, sometimes scary human being, because anyone who is successful as he was at such an early age. I mean, this guy was national spokesman for a presidential campaign when he was 26 years old. You know, 2 years before that, he was a press secretary for, you know, at 24, a press secretary for Tom Daschle, who was Senate Majority Leader at that time. He was wielding an unbelievable amount of influence and power at a very young age. And
Had he been a Columbia student too?
yeah. And he barely, like me, squeaked in. He didn't have the SAT scores that came anywhere close to what the minimum was, but you know, he got into a career in politics. He knew how to work it, and this guy did every extracurricular activity on the planet. He's from Macon, Georgia. We rode on the crew team together up in the Harlem River, became fast friends, and he got into politics interning for George Stephanopoulos, who was here teaching for a year, and helped him research his book. You can find Jay Carson's name in the acknowledgments, you know, way at the bottom. And Stephanopoulos said, you really should go work for this guy from Brooklyn who's going to run for Senate and probably win. At that time, though, Schumer was a totally unknown congressman from Brooklyn. He was running in the primary against Mark Green and Geraldine Ferraro, who was at 65%. Schumer was at 3%. But he had the best team and a real... he just had a top-notch operation and went from 3% to trouncing Ferraro and Green, and then defeating three-time, you know, incumbent Alphonse D'Amato by over 10 points.
I actually remember this.
Yeah. Well,
I was
in the
around.
play, there's a story about how in a fictional race, the putz head comment gets turned around as an anti-Semitic remark. And that actually happened. I stole that directly from the Schumer-D'Amato campaign, where just a few days before the election, at an event with conservative Jewish donors in Flatbush, D'Amato was speaking he was playing the crowd, and he calls Schumer a putz head. And he's speaking to a Jewish crowd. They all laugh. In Yiddish, putz head means dickhead. So what the Schumer campaign did, although it didn't make it seem it was coming from them, is they took this comment, which was just a little like quote in an AP Wire piece, and had it characterized as an anti-Semitic remark. Now, you can claim that, but if in context, D'Amato was playing to a warm crowd that thought this was a funny thing. But out of context, you make him an anti-Semite, which, because he's Italian-American and you're in New York City, it gets very complex. So he denies making the comment. And then we're like, we got him. Because it's there in print, there's a recording. So then he has to admit that he made the comment. Then he refuses to apologize for it, but it just starts to tumble and avalanche, and then he has to apologize for something that he refused to apologize before that he had first denied. And overnight, he lost like 10 points. But that was just pure spin. You know, did he deserve to lose because of a comment that we took out of context and spun the right way? Well, if you lose, you lose. I mean, yeah.
Listen, after watching some of House of Cards, I felt like the line has to now read, all's fair in love, war, and politics. Because, there is a certain sense in which one takes a glee in the manipulations of characters that you're identifying with. I mean, if someone is facing the camera and pulling me into his complicity, he's got me, and even if he's going to do some pretty questionable things, I realize I'm invested. It's too late.
Outright questionable things, yeah.
Yeah. All right, outright
No,
questionable
but that
things.
direct address, which goes back to Shakespeare and the Greeks way before him, it does exactly what you're talking about. It makes you complicit in this person's schemes. I mean, you feel as though you're a passive, at times even active partner in that. So it helps you in rooting for someone. I mean, it's why it works so well in Richard III, because here's one of the most dastardly villains of all time. And villains, by the way, are more interesting. Think of all of Shakespeare's greatest characters. They're villains, the great ones. The Richard III, even Hamlet's a villain if you really think about it. Iago, but the risk you take in breaking the fourth wall, especially in cinema, is that you are. It's such a fragile suspension of disbelief, because unlike the stage where we're occupying the same air molecules, like as I speak, even though we have this microphone, I'm creating sound waves that are compressing air and making them their way to your eardrum. There's a literal physical connection between us. This isn't like new agey stuff. It's real. and your ability to focus energy when you have that direct physical connection is very different than film, which ultimately is photons on a screen. That's all it is. It's complete illusion. And that's why film time moves much quicker than stage time. It's why you see many lesser films rely on spectacle to engage an audience, because it's so much more fragile in a way. And with the direct address, you are challenging that fragility, because you're saying suspension of disbelief. Sorry, I'm talking to you through this flat thing. And yet if you do it right, it only amplifies the drama and makes the suspension of disbelief twice as powerful. But it's a very tricky thing. We fail all the time at that. There's a lot of direct addresses that find their way on the cutting room floor, or the digital trash box, I guess. We don't use actual film.
Part of it is that the character who is doing that direct address better be super smart. He's got to be smarter than me, because that's what's going to get me in to go with him on that trip. If he were less articulate, if he were less vital in his ambition,
Well, you hit the nail on the head. We've tried direct addresses where he's giving us access to his emotional state, which when you, exactly, that's what she did. When you do that, you're automatically putting a character into a place of inarticulateness, because when you're in an emotional state, you're processing an emotion, not a thought, and your ability to relay that emotion in real time, if it's articulate, is false. So it doesn't work. You got to show the emotional state, and direct address only works, and here you can totally look at Richard III. I mean, when Richard is saying to you, hey, look, this is what I'm going to do. Now let's see if it works. Ha, 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 ha. He goes off and he does it, and then he checks back in with you and goes, I can't believe that worked. Can you? That was pretty great. Now let's see if we can do the next thing. By Act 4 and 5 of Richard III, the soliloquies have a change in tone, and they become actually emotional. And you see, really for one of the first times in Western theater, the idea of real stream of conscious thought being dramatized. And he is contradicting himself at every turn. He thinks something, goes, no, but not that. But could it be? I don't know. But wait, and it works in Richard III, partly because Shakespeare was a genius. That helps. But two, because it doesn't have to sustain itself. By that point, we're very close to the end of the play, and we know what's coming. I mean, the audience knew that this guy was, my kingdom for a horse. He was gonna lose it. So, if you're doing an ongoing story that spans over years, and you don't have that momentum towards the end in the same way, then it's disastrous. You find yourself hating the direct address when he's trying to tell you how he's feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. Before we go back into House of Cards, I do want to ask about the experience of working with George Clooney and Grant Heslov on the script of Ides of March, which was from your play. And I was, for a first-time screenwriter, that's some pretty heady company. Was that experience, first of all, sufficiently good, nurturing, that it made you decide to keep writing for film and/or television? But what was the nature of that? You mentioned just before we came up here that you weren't in the same room with Clooney and Heslov, which I was a little surprised by.
Yeah, well, look, when you see written by on a film, that doesn't mean that all those names you see, if there's more than one, are sitting in the same room. Oftentimes it means someone got fired, and then someone else took a stab, and then they got fired, and then someone else took a stab. That's not what happened with Ides of March, but I wrote a couple drafts of it. And getting notes from Clooney and Grant and stuff, but I wrote, and Warner Brothers, which ended up not making the film. It was ultimately distribution was through Sony, whatever, it doesn't matter. But I did my drafts, and then at a certain point they took over and worked separately and worked off the material I'd written and changed a lot of things and did their stuff, and then they did me the courtesy of sharing that draft with me, and gave me the opportunity to say whatever I wanted to say. But I went into that very differently than I go into, say, most things. It's important to have your own strong artistic vision, and I certainly did with that story. But I knew the play, as I had written it, without a word being changed, was going to be produced. And I knew the film had to be different. It's not like you could just take the play and film the play. The rules are different. And a lot of times, when it happens that people film a play word for word, but it's very difficult to pull off. Extremely difficult to pull off. And this play just wouldn't have worked that way. So I had already known, I'm going to let go. I had the experience of writing this play and doing exactly what I want to do. Now we have the opportunity to expand and do something different, and there's some really talented people involved. And isn't it exciting to see how they take something that started with me and what they do with it, that it was an opportunity to experience someone else's imagination. So I didn't feel protective or defensive or anything. I actually was excited to see where they took it, and it had already made a peace with sort of letting it go and letting it be his film, because he was the director of the film, and he was producing it. It was his jam, and I needed to celebrate that. Now, I've been on the flip side mostly when it comes to House of Cards, because I have a staff of writers, and they're all amazing, and they write great scripts, but then I rewrite all their work. They will work on their script, and then I do my pass, and I might, in some cases, change 60 to 70 to 80% of it. But one of the things I learned in grad school here was the importance in the performative arts, and I count cinema and TV as performative arts, is the importance of collaboration. That you can have a strong vision, and you must have a strong vision, but greatness is only achieved by allowing others into that vision and relying on the talents of others, inviting them into the conversation, realizing that the thing you're making is bigger than any one person. And while at Columbia's film program, I don't know if it's the same now. There was auteur theory was a pretty heavy part of it.
It's still there.
Yeah.
I'm still teaching.
Yeah, it'd be an interesting debate. I think it's a destructive way to think about art making, especially in media which rely on hundreds of people in order to accomplish something that's greater than any one person. That doesn't mean that someone doesn't make decisions. It doesn't mean that someone isn't sort of providing the impetus and the drive and the core. But I would be lying if I said that House of Cards was purely my vision, you know? And if it was just my vision and mine alone, it would be inferior. And I think even the great films and TV shows where you are led to the illusion that it's one person's pure vision, I think is fallacy.
No, even I, who teach auteur stuff, I would never go that far. I mean, I think that strong directors mark their films in ways that make for great classroom discussion. Ultimately, of course, cinema, television are profoundly collaborative. And, you know, I would think that there was an interesting tension even between whatever vision you had originally put into Farragut North and George Clooney, who himself, presumably you would have trusted him on the basis of his movie Good Night and Good Luck.
This is why I was able to let go, was because the core story of this young man becoming a monster over the course of this 120 minutes, 90 minutes in case of the film, that I knew was going to remain always, that we were telling the same story. So it was more like a variation on a theme, you know. It was sort of like, I want to see, you know, Miley Cyrus does an amazing version of Jolene. Very different than the original, but the same song. Laura Marling does an incredible Springsteen cover that couldn't, you know, Dance in the Dark, that couldn't sound more unlike The Boss, but it is equally beautiful, and yet the core song and melody is there, and that's how I thought about it.
I have about 20 more questions for you. However, we want to allow the people here to ask a few too.
I'm sorry, I'm a rambler.
No, you're not.
Yeah.
No,
I was so quiet at the back of your class. Little did you know.
That may be. I consider you an impeccable wordsmith. And rambler is not a term I would use at all. I kind of find fascinating everything you're talking about. But we're going to allow for some questions. There is a microphone right there. I see one hand that has already gone up.
Just
go right
up
up
there.
and ask,
just
and then
like
there's
piranhas.
There's a woman right here whose hand went up second, so feel free to stand behind her.
Hi, I'm Marissa Lepore. I'm a junior at Columbia College, and I'm a huge fan of your show, and I find that I can't multitask at all while watching it. I've tried running, I've tried online shopping, and
Multitasking is a myth, by the way. It doesn't exist.
I just heard that actually
It's impossible
yesterday.
for the human brain to
And
multitask.
so the plot is so complex. How far out have you kind of imagined the show or the trajectory of the characters, or how does that work when you were initially planning the show?
Try to answer that briefly. When I first started working on the show with Fincher, our initial goal was 60 pages, the first hour, and then thinking about where it could go by the end of the first season. We worked for a full year on that first script, and then it was time to find a home. A company called MRC, a studio, owned the underlying rights. They actually owned the show, but we were going to find where it was going to air, and we thought it was going to be HBO or Showtime or not Netflix, or AMC. And in fact, we said, if you want to do the show, great, show up. Otherwise, don't come to the meeting. And they all came to Fincher's office. This is how Fincher operates. David Fincher fans here? Yeah. Pretty extraordinary guy. So they all come in one after another, and we say, we want a full season guaranteed up front. Now that has become more commonplace, but at the time, they didn't even give that to Martin Scorsese at HBO. They had to shoot a pilot for Boardwalk Empire, and we said, no, not for us. A lot of hubris here, because none of us had done TV. We said, we don't want to audition with the pilot. You either guarantee a full season, or we can all go on with our film careers. Like, we don't care. We don't, you know. And by the way, important lesson, the person who's willing to walk away from the table first has all the power. Because you're saying your reality doesn't matter as much to me. I don't care about your reality. And that's not a good way to empathize, but it is good in negotiation. And so where was I going to? Oh yeah, so they were all kind of nervous about that, and then Netflix said, we want to get in the original programming game. We sat down with them. We said the same thing, hubristic as we were. We want a full season or 2. They go, oh yeah, we're in the content business. We probably want 2 seasons up front. We're like, okay. Trying to play it cool, you know. We go, also creative control is important to us. We need complete creative control. And they go, we don't even have any development executives in our employ. We just believe in this show and this team, and we want you to make the show you want to make, and we'll put it out to the world. We're like, all right, we'll think about it. And we said to ourselves, do we want to actually put our show on the internet? Which now sounds like, you know, a crazy thing that we would have ever doubted this was, you know, a good thing. And yet, you know, I guess we sort of felt like, all right, they've never done TV, we've never done TV, let's all jump in a, you know, padded room together and get crazy. And so the reason I told all of that is when we knew we had that 2-season order, immediately I start thinking about 2 seasons at once. Now, to put that in perspective, it's the equivalent of 13 feature films that we're going to make over the course of 2 years. That's a lot of story. It's 1,600 pages of script. It is epic. I mean, it is more content than some great filmmakers have done in their entire careers. Because if you're making 1 movie every year or 2 years for a long career, I memean, that's still not necessarily 26 hours worth. And so I had to start thinking about the end point for season 2, hour 26, which I knew was going to be the presidency. And I roughly knew that the vice presidency was going to be at the end of season 1. And that was a story of ascendancy. And I thought that if as far as we ever got was 2 seasons, then we could end with him assuming office. And the hope was it would go beyond, but the weird thing about TV is you don't necessarily know. So I started thinking about season 3 pretty far out because I knew it would require a sort of paradigmatic shift in the show because we had no longer had the story of ascendancy. But I had no clue what we were going to do until really we got into the room and started banging it out. And how do you write 800 pages in a year? Well, it takes us 8 months to do it. 7 heads are better than 1. First 6 weeks, we create a grid where we have all the major characters and storylines and 13 episodes, columns, and I have some ideas about the overall trajectories of these characters and storylines on day 1, but then we talk about it, start to fill in this grid almost arbitrarily. Episodes start to coalesce and take form, kind of like the early days of the universe where you had all of these like, you know, this soup of like Higgs boson particles and quarks and stuff, and they all started to kind of like gravitate towards each other. We've got an astrophysicist in the room. Yeah. And then, you know, they gravitate into these masses that become heavy elements, and that's what happens to the episodes, kind of. So then we have like our periodic table of story. And then we write what's called a Bible. So now, any theologians in the room? We call it a Bible. That it's like a 70-page document that's a basic outline for the season. And then we start breaking episodes one by one. It takes about 2 weeks to break one episode. That's in minute detail, beat by beat, moment by moment. That results in about a 15-page outline that we collectively write together on the same day. Then I assign the episode. If I'm not writing it myself, that person has 2 weeks to write 60 pages based on this outline. Then I give them notes. They have another week. Then I give them notes again, or I take it over. Ultimately ends up with my pass, where I take those 60 pages and I rewrite them. And that's only the beginning of the process, because then I share it with the fellow EPs and the actors and the director. I get their thoughts. We do a table read. I adjust based on, you know, conversations with the production team in terms of, hey, you know what? We can't make that yacht blow up. That'll be half our budget for this episode. I go, okay, but like, I don't know, can we crash a Pinto into a pole? Yeah, we can afford that, right? So we haven't done that yet. We should. And then you're filming it, and in rehearsal with the actors, we're changing things on the fly, removing a line here, trying a new one there. Then you get to editing, where writing continues, because you actually are writing in the editing either by what scenes you remove, or you go, we're really missing a scene and we got to do additional photography, or even the lines you cut in the editing. And I would even argue that the angles you choose at certain moments are a form of writing. And then, only when it's locked and color corrected and sound mixed and all that, do I actually feel like the script is done. And in fact, we go back and we take the final episode as it's, the locked version, and then we revise the script to match what we shot for posterity. But no, actually for dubbing and translation. So that's a long answer to your question. I hope I covered it.
Yes, you did.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'll be shorter.
That's fine.
Yeah. Or I'll talk quicker, or a combination of the two.
My name is Christina Ramos. I'm a Columbia College alum and currently a playwright and actor. And I'm fascinated by the fact that you said that most of your writing team are playwrights and that you come from, to some extent, a playwriting background. And I guess I'm curious about...
A lot of the great writers in television, folks that started out in the sort of revolution of television that happened in the early days of HBO were playwrights.
Which makes sense. It's incredibly theatrical, kind of what you're doing, and all the allusions to Shakespeare. But I guess my question is, in some ways, do you miss it? Because I'm assuming you don't have time anymore to write for theater.
You're
Maybe
wrong.
You do. I'm sure you do it, like, when you don't sleep. And sort of, kind of why, I guess, for you, why is it important to you to have playwriting be a part of the process?
Well, the reason I hire playwrights is because there is almost zero chance of fame and fortune if you pursue a life in the theater. It is, take even the most successful playwrights out there. Tony Kushner, who I'm doing an event with tomorrow, in fact. David Mamet, some of the great playwrights out there now, they don't support themselves with their plays, even them. They're all writing films and TV shows. And early on, in the early days of television, in fact, a lot of playwrights were subsidizing their ability to write for the theater by working in television. It was mostly seen as a money gig, but as television became more sophisticated, I wouldn't say better, I shouldn't even say more sophisticated, because what Norman Lear was doing with like All in the Family was pretty sophisticated stuff. And in fact, I'll show you, give me any episode of The Honeymooners and hold it up against some of the best Roman comedies, and it's just as good. But anyway, the people that are writing for theater would crawl across a desert to tell a good story, because they're not doing it for money, and they're not doing it for red carpet photo ops and all that stuff. That hunger, that thirst, is the thing I'm after. Also, the only way you've got a shot in the theater is by having an original voice, whereas often in Hollywood or commercial Hollywood, your best shot is by not having an original voice. It's by repeating the franchise that works. So I don't care if the writer that I'm working with knows anything about politics. In fact, oftentimes I prefer that they don't. The only thing I'm looking for when I read the material is there that scene, that moment, that line that I never in a million years could have written myself. You need a diversity of imagination in order for seven heads to be better than one. And original voice is your only calling card in the theater. And so that's why I gravitate towards them. The theater can teach you a lot of things that are helpful in film, and there's a lot of great filmmakers that came from a theater background. Look at what Bergman was doing. And
Orson
theater
Welles.
remained with, Orson Welles, and so many others. It's not a prerequisite, of course, but they are, as I mentioned, collaborative. It's a collaborative medium. And one of the things I learned in the theater was how to talk to actors and how to talk to a director. Which is a very important skill to have, I think. When there's that lack of communication, or you're afraid of actors, or a lot of TV and film writers are actually kind of repulsed by actors, or they see them as these puppets or machines. They're supposed to execute a story. I actually find that, like the theater, the only reason anyone shows up is to see actors do interesting things. I mean, a great film you should be able to watch on mute and still get, the magic of it. The scripts, the cameras, the lights, the sound, it's all there to serve the actors. Because even the greatest auteur, director, is nothing without his or her actors. And so being in that room, sharing that space and forcing one another to communicate with each other in order to achieve something that you're going to put in front of a stage, in front of people who will tell you, quite honestly, by their reactions, whether it's shit or not. Forget the critics. I mean, nothing tells you better than the energy in a room, what you've got. And sometimes half the people walk out, and that's a good thing. You know that you've really struck a chord. But there's a truth to that, and I use that every day. Yes, I keep writing plays, and I still keep putting them up. It's my first love, and I'm a polygamist when it comes to artistic mediums. So.
Well, thank you.
Hi there. My name is Chuck Roberts. I'm a graduate from Columbia College as well. I've worked in politics, and so I'm interested in hearing you talk about the interplay between art and reality in a political context. To what extent do you seek to provide commentary on contemporary American politics in both Ides of March and House of Cards, and whether that was your intent or not, the extent to which, and you
No.
mentioned
No, it's not.
Well, if it's not your intent, you mentioned Jay Carney and the White
Carson.
House spot and the...
Oh,
and-
Jay Carney.
and-
Yeah, that was a spoof for the White House Correspondents' Dinner. No, zero agenda politically. Not at all interested in trying to provide insight or commentary on the American political process. Show's not about politics.
Okay.
It's about power.
Okay.
And power is much bigger than politics. Politics is just one form of power. And I think I think all stories actually are ultimately about power, and I think all stories are in some ways political. My Fair Lady, great musical, deeply political, has to do with gender issues and class, and I mean, it goes back to Pygmalion. It's politically quite rich, even though it's, you might just see it as a bunch of show tunes, it's much more than that. Seinfeld, political without even maybe realizing it's political, in terms of the sort of ennui of a certain class. These are all things, though, that the moment you try to point a finger at them and say, this is my project, you become didactic and propagandistic. You might as well write an essay. I only care about the characters and their worldviews and the experiences they go through, because they happen to live in a political world. I mean, they work in a political world. Obviously, we're dramatizing that world, and one can draw whatever they want from that. But we're not trying to educate anyone. It's not our responsibility. Our only responsibility is to create an authentic world, so that we can suspend that disbelief. And if you don't know that world really well, then it will ring false. And if you learn something from the fact that we've portrayed a world accurately, great, fantastic, happy for you, but I don't care. I'm not saying that in a cavalier way. It's just not our project.
To the extent, though, that it is embraced by the political elite in Washington, or that you embrace that back by participating in a spoof for the White House Correspondents' Dinner, how problematic is it that the show emulates as sort of what many people feel is a lack of sincerity, a lack of idealism in Washington and American politics right now? Do you think about that?
Do you think a TV show can make people idealistic?
I would think so. I can point to some that...
It'd be a terrible TV show.
I don't think The West Wing is a terrible TV show, but I think that
yeah,
does
but
inspire
do you
that.
think it's idealistic?
I think in many ways, yes. I haven't seen...
I would
I'm trying to
I would
think of-
encourage you to go back and watch it,
Okay.
because I think unfairly the West Wing is seen as this pure fantasy of what politics can be. But actually, more often than not, you see them fail. I mean, in the sausage making of the Jed Bartlett administration, it's not an easy road, and people's idealism is often questioned or eroded or challenged. Now, I do not think it is a responsibility of art to make people good. That's an impossible responsibility to have. I think, first and foremost, honestly, art is entertainment. And I think that entertainment is a noble thing. Now, entertainment can mean enriching your soul, having, you question things, going through sort of profound emotional states, provoking thought. That's a form of entertainment. But, you cannot mistake it for the same thing that Martin Luther King is doing. Its approach to the soul is oblique, and it's a selfish endeavor. I mean, I don't wake up in the morning to do what I do for any of you. I do it for me. And a lot of people don't want to admit that, but I think most people involved in the arts, if they're honest themselves, accept that. And I need you guys in order to keep doing what I do, but I'm never going to pander to you. I'm only interested in pleasing myself. And to the degree to which I please you, wonderful. That means I can keep doing it. But even if I stopped pleasing all of you and I never got a job again, I'm still going to I'll go back to teaching SAT prep courses like I did when I graduated with my master's degree from Columbia University. I'll go back to that temp job collating and FedExing stuff for people in Rock Plaza like I did after I had my master's degree from Columbia University. And I will tell the stories I want to tell the way I want to tell them, even if no one will do them. Because as long as I challenge myself and please myself, then that's all I can do. I think that, in terms of idealism, it's such a tricky word. What is idealism? I mean, there's utopian versions of idealism. The world should be this. But, your utopia ain't my utopia necessarily. You can look at cynicism, which is defined by a belief that people are only driven by self-interest, and say that's a bad thing. And yet, what is America built on if not self-interest and individualism, self-reliance? Read your Emerson. I mean, you could say Emerson is deeply cynical by the definition of cynicism. We see people like Frank Underwood, and you think, okay, this is a guy who's seeking power for power's sake, and yet he's honest about that. He's not trying to pull the wool over at least our eyes, the audience's eyes, and he sees ideology for being the quicksand that it is. Pure ideology, in his view, is a form of cowardice because it prescribes all behavior. It means you have no choice. It means that you must do exactly what your ideology dictates, and there is no room for flexibility or compromise, which is a death of the imagination. And I think that he sees a world in which there is no good or evil because, remember that soup of particles, of quarks and Higgs bosons? No notion of good or evil. They're going to collide and gravitate towards one another or explode or fly away from each other because of dark energy, and they don't care, And he says, I, in serving myself, offer you forward momentum and progress. Does it matter what my motivations are if something happens as opposed to nothing? And we've seen a Washington, D.C. that is mired in gridlock because of entrenched ideologies that do not bend. So I say, is ethically it worse to do nothing and have people suffer as a result than to do something, even if it's motivated purely by self-interest? And there's that quote in season 3, the FDR quote, which I'll butcher now, but he says this country was built on the notion of bold experimentation. We try something, and if it fails, we admit it frankly and try something new. But above all, we must try. And Frank is an optimist in that regard. He says, I will try. I will say what is impossible is possible, and I will attempt to make the impossible possible. That's a deeply optimistic point of view. It's a non-ideological, optimistic point of view, and I know plenty of cynical idealists out there. Ask anyone who's worked for an NGO for more than a year. So, do you see why I can't process your question?
To a certain extent, yes. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for asking.
We have time for one more, that's it.
Good, perfect. We have one more questioner.
Perfect.
A little scared to follow up after that, but my name's Eliza.
I learned all those $5 words at Columbia University.
I'm Eliza Polks. I graduated from Columbia College. I think the Shakespeare professor you were talking about is Gene Howard. Just
Yes.
In case, so just wanted
There you
to
go. Yeah.
give you that. In light of what you were saying about sort of the act of, creating the show being something that at the end of the day you do for yourself, you're not pandering to the audience. That being said, I was wondering if the fact that House of Cards sort of comes out all at once and there's this whole experience of getting to binge watch it, and that's become such a cultural phenomenon, the pressure of, okay, House of Cards is out, I have to watch the entire thing right now, and have you seen all of it yet? And it's definitely changed the way that I experience the show and the way that I am able to remember things, details in one episode, how they come up in another one. And I was wondering if the fact that that your viewers are going to experience the entire thing, maybe even in one go, changes how you might kind of construct some of these episodes or
Not
stories.
really. And here's why. Because we didn't know we were going to release it all in one day until about halfway through production of season 1. We knew it was a possibility, but we were also considering a traditional week-to-week release. We considered maybe doing it in chunks of 4. We didn't know. And so even once we decided that that's how we were going to do it, there is nothing that dictates that you must binge watch, except yourself and your social
Societal
media peer
pressures.
community. Yeah. Nothing, and in fact, a lot of people don't binge watch. They spread it out over time. So it has to be able to work both ways, and I think it's analogous more to a novel. Any Harry Potter fans in here? Yeah, all right, yeah, okay. So some people would order that book, it would arrive, whatever the next installment was, and they would fly through 700 pages in one sitting. You're one of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. And other people, would space it out over time. I mean, in any novel, once you write it, you have no idea whether someone's going to read it in one sitting in their quiet living room or 10 pages at a time over months on their commute to work on the loud subway train each day. You have zero control over that. And we had even less control in some ways because you can watch our show on a TV, you can watch it on a phone, you can watch it on a tablet, you can watch it all at once, you can watch it spread out over many weeks or months. So it has to be able to work no matter what. And if you look at a lot of the great shows over the past 20 years, shows like The Sopranos, Deadwood, The Wire, I can go on and on. I experienced many of those shows binging them, not before the phrase was coined. A lot of people would wait until box sets came out in order to experience a whole season over the course of a day or two. So binge watching as a cultural phenomenon is something that's actually been going on for well over a decade, and all we did with our and by the way, all those shows were released week to week, and yet they still worked as binge experiences. You know why? Because there's a really good fucking story, and that's really what it comes down to. And so, if you tell a good story, it's bingeable, and if you tell a bad story, you'll never make it past the third hour, binging or not. So that's our only sort of rubric. And look, actually, if you look at the early days of cinema, right? I mean, what is that? Okay, you got to help me out here. Is it Erich von Stroheim did the 12-hour
Yeah.
movie that took place in the desert?
Greed.
Greed. Did I pronounce his surname
Eric von
correctly?
Stroheim, perfect.
Ha ha ha. Look at that.
Columbia.
I even learned that not in her class. you know.
Correct.
I learned it. You know what I actually learned it from was that Mark Cousin's Story of Film.
Oh, yeah.
Do you
I have
like
seen-
it? Do you?
I've only seen parts of it, but I found it provocative and
interesting.
interesting. I mean, occasionally not my view, but that's
Right,
okay.
Yeah. It's not okay. It should all be your view all the time. No, I'm just joking.
Boring.
No, yeah, and so there, I mean, that was something like an 8-hour movie. I mean, before people knew what a movie was, they were trying all sorts of stuff, and people's attention spans, I mean, you know, people used to go to the opera for 6 hours at a time. People think our attention spans have been diminishing, you know, over the years, and one of the most interesting things about the sort of latest incarnations of television is that we find people have extraordinary attention spans. You know, so I don't know. I mean, your question was, does it affect the way we write it? Well, mostly not, but I also have no other show to compare it to because this is my first TV show, so I can't really say. But thanks.
Well, congrats. Your show is amazing.
Thank you.
I know that for a lot of us, we could easily sit here we could binge with you, you know, in the flesh and just spend another couple of hours listening, but I know that you have a lot to do. You are a very busy man, and I just want to say how exciting it has been for me to welcome you back to the campus, because on behalf of both the School of the Arts and Columbia College, we're proud of you.
Oh, shucks.
Thank you
thanks.
both.
That was great. Thank you.
My pleasure. Come down here.